Hey guys, this is Jeremy from Deviatus. Just a quick note to let you know, after my interview with today's guest, please stick around. I want your feedback on an EVP that I recorded just a couple weekends ago. So I'm going to have some information following today's interview and how you can hear the uncompressed version of it, but I will play it on the podcast. So don't go anywhere as soon as the interview is over. Hello everyone, we are back with another edition of Deviatus. We're now up to episode 14. I just want to send out a quick reminder for the month of October. We're still doing our giveaway of an autographed copy of Proof the Novel by Ted Berner. For details on how to enter, please check out deviatus.com/Berner. I really hope you enjoyed last week's episode. I seem to get a lot of great feedback with Cliff Barackman. And I just wanted to send a quick shout out to friend of the show, Ryan Sprague. He's from episode 3. Remember, he came out and did the discussions about UFOs, and his new book, which was not yet released at the time of the interview, Somewhere in the Skies. Well, that book has come out. It is now available. He's getting some great reviews on it, and they just released a full episode of Into the Fray. It was really interesting. They interviewed a couple people that he wrote stories about in that book who told their accounts of what had happened to them and their experiences with UFOs and aliens. So congrats, Ryan, on the book. I know I'll be picking up my copy very soon. Now this week, I'm very pleased to have our guest, Rhonda Parrish, join us on Deviatus. If her name sounds familiar, it's because her co-author of Haunted Hospitals, Mark Leslie, joined us on episode 9. And during his interview, we learned that they split up the book and were each accountable for different stories within the book. So me working primarily in healthcare, I have a vested interest in hospitals and also having my own experience in them. I was very excited to sit down with Rhonda to see if and how her stories varied from Mark's at all. So without further ado, here is Rhonda Parrish of Haunted Hospitals. Okay, today's guest is co-author of Haunted Hospitals, Eerie Tales about Hospitals, Sanatoriums, and Other Institutions. Rhonda Parrish joins me on this week's episode of Deviatus. Rhonda, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Now, before we talk hospitals, I'd like to hear a little bit about yourself and maybe your background.
Mostly these days I do a lot of editing, but I'm trying to get more into writing. I've done a ridiculous number of anthologies, at least like 2 series. One is the Magical Menageries anthology series, which is magical creatures and stuff, and that's through World River Press. And the other is one that I self-publish, and it's the Alphabet Anthologies, and that's 26 anthologies. Well, it will be when it's done, each with 26 stories. And that's keeping me pretty busy, but I really wanted to try my hand at nonfiction, and so Haunted Hospitals opened the door for that for me.
Yeah, and I follow you on Twitter. You seem to have just a barrage of books. You're always tweeting about them. Like, oh my gosh, you've been very busy.
I'm pretty prolific and a bit of a workaholic.
So what initially got you interested in the paranormal?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I know the answer. I've always kind of been interested in darker things, which probably came from my mom, because the reading material around the house when I was a kid was always darker stuff, Stephen King and unexplained mysteries and that sort of thing. So that's sort of what I grew up on, and I think it probably came from there. You go from the fiction, and then you want to know people's true ghost stories to complement that, I guess.
Well, I often find that people who have an interest in the paranormal have had some kind of personal experience, or at least have known someone very close to them who have. Have you had any paranormal experiences yourself that you're willing to share?
So I come to the paranormal from a pretty skeptical place. I'm the skeptical person in the pair of Mark and I think. But I believe in energy, and I believe anything is possible, and I also like really good stories. So when I say that I had a experience that I can't really explain. I'm still not sure I want to call it paranormal because I was very young. So it could just be imagination. But when I was quite young, 4 or 5, based on the house that we were in, I came upstairs. My bedroom was an attic, and I shared it with my brother. And I came up the stairs. It was late at night and it was dark. But there was light behind me because the babysitter was awake. And when I came up the stairs, I saw somebody standing in the room. And I thought it was my brother at first because I shared the room with him, but it seemed too big to be him. And it was, because it was dark and the light was behind me, it wasn't a solid figure that I could like say that's that's Fred. It was sort of like if you rub your eyes and you see the like pinpricks of light that under your eyelid. It was a form made up of that, and then it just wasn't there anymore. So, but it was there, and then it wasn't. So I was quite young, and I had a very vibrant imagination. I don't believe that I imagined that, but it's possible.
Wow. Did you ever ask your parents about that?
I did, and my mom just said you have a really vivid imagination, and I'm sure you just imagined it.
Well, I often like to distinguish between, the term to me paranormal just means unexplained, and I find that you often find, the hardcore skeptics who come at you and say there's no scientific proof that ghosts exist, therefore, there's no such thing. And I tend to find comfort in that gray area of, hey, just because you can't explain it doesn't mean, that science has an explanation for everything here. You can't disprove it. So it's interesting, when I was talking to Mark and Mark Leslie in episode 9, he brought some interesting elements to the book that he spoke about regarding the experiences he's had just talking to people about their particular experiences, and he had a whole method where he cataloged them and later went back to them to get details about those stories. What kind of process did you have in the creation of this book?
Most of my research, unfortunately, wasn't interviewing people, which it's the interviews I did were my absolute favorite part, because then you could talk to people and you could ask them questions and you could get details, and being the skeptic, I could like say, well, could it have been this or could it have been that? And they could say, no. But most of my research was done at the library and online, just because it was difficult to get the word out and get people to tell us their story and be willing to go on the record as telling their story, even if, in some cases you don't use the real name because people are afraid of being stigmatized or whatever. But some people, even with the option of using a fake name, they're like, no, I'm not ready to go on the record for this. So most of my research was done lots and lots of notes and lots of time staring at my computer screen. But when I got to talk to people, I recorded it so that I wouldn't miss anything, and I took lots of notes.
Well, that's great. So my mind is going a bunch of different directions here. When you actually visited the library, what kinds of research were you doing? Was it just more of a looking for ghost stories, or were you looking for periodicals, or how did you conduct your research there?
I was mostly looking for ghost stories, and Mark, my co-author, has written a lot of like spooky storybooks. He did like Creepy Capital about Ottawa and Haunted Hamilton, and it was really funny because when I was trying to find haunted hospital stuff and ghost stories and like true like paranormal nonfiction, I kept finding his books. And that's only helpful to a point, because Mark was also writing, so anything that was in the books he would know. So that was a little tricky.
Now, did you make a point to interview people who had either worked there or might have been patients there, or was it kind of just a mixed bag of whoever would be willing to come forward with an experience?
I didn't actually get to talk to anybody who worked in any of the hospitals, which is unfortunate because I think if you're spending a lot of time in these places, you would obviously be the one who would be most likely to have the really good stories. I talked to the longest interview I did was with a couple here in Edmonton who are paranormal investigators, Ben and Rhonda, and they had been in the Charles Camsell Hospital, which is very close to my house and is said to be haunted. And I had a great, really long interview with them and got tons of awesome stories. But they were investigators. They hadn't worked in the hospital in any sort of capacity.
Okay. And they investigated it obviously after abandonment, but how long had that particular hospital been abandoned before they went in to do an investigation?
Not very. That hospital was kind of different in that it shut down, but it was left pretty much intact. It still had power, it still had tons of equipment, and there were television shows and movies filmed in there using it as a setting as a hospital. So it was actually in very good condition for longer than most hospitals when they're abandoned and emptied out. And I think that Ben and Rhonda had been in there. There was still power when they were in there, so I would say within the first year or so of it being shut down.
Yeah, that seems like it's pretty rare. It seems like most of these things you see, at least on TV or that you hear of from paranormal groups, it's always abandoned and often disheveled. Kind of a dangerous place to be, just from the wreckage that's there. But did they at any time invite you out on an investigation?
They didn't, but I should definitely get back in touch with them about that.
Would you do it?
I would totally be all over that. That would be very cool.
I got to tell you, because I've been starting to do some investigations myself with a local group here in San Diego, and it's almost like a bug. Once you start doing it and you catch that first piece of evidence that you can't personally explain, you actually being there, it's quite addicting.
I can imagine. I think just urban exploration of abandoned places could be incredibly addicting. So then if you add, spooky stories and unexplained activity on top of that, that would be pretty epic.
Well, why do you think that these particular spirits linger around hospitals specifically?
Oh, there's so much emotion tied up around hospitals. That's where, people are born there and people die there. And while those are very, emotional, important things, there's also a lot of suffering there while people are there because, doctors do what they can, but you're not there because you're well. So, and I tend to feel like that would leave, if you believe in psychic imprints or lingering energy, I think that suffering would be a primary cause of that, even more so than birth or death. Because, and birth and death, the reason that they are so important is also because of the suffering, right? Like the people who are left behind or the people who are leaving. I feel like they're all interconnected, and it's, about emotion and energy.
I think you hit on a good point. It hasn't been until recently where I've started listening to stories where, people might see apparitions, but one of the apparitions, if not more than one, have actually been of people that are still living. So I think you bring in the emotional aspect. It's just fascinating to me because it's not necessarily that a spirit is dead and living there, but how many, if you had to classify or give a percentage to how many stories of deceased people versus people who might still be alive did you come across in the creation of this book?
Mostly deceased people. I think that's partly related to who is willing to tell their stories. If you know it's somebody who is not deceased, you would want to protect their identity, and some people are better at that than others. Mm-hmm. So I think it's partly a privacy thing, for sure.
Well, I don't want to spoil any of the book, but is there any sort of stories that stood out to you as being more compelling than the rest?
Oh, I want to say the stories that involve children, but there's a really big disclaimer that goes with that, and that is that every hospital seems to have, and again, this is the skeptic in me. Every haunted hospital has a child ghost that plays with a ball.
Hmm.
But, and the ball's movement can usually be explained by uneven floor or drafts or whatnot. But stories about kids, because they're always so tragic, you know, everybody dies, but when people die before they get a chance to even begin living, it's especially tragic. So there's tons of extra emotions that surround the stories about kids, and that totally speaks to me. You know, in a I don't want to say I like it, obviously, but it's got an emotional impact that really resonates and sticks with me.
Well, and I think too, it's hard enough to deal with death, from an adult perspective. But yeah, children, there is so much tragedy with it. I'm getting a sense, kind of, that a lot of people who probably have these hospital experiences, either were what am I trying to say? I'm feeling tripped up on words here. I apologize. I feel like they're either they walked away with an absolute certainty that something happened, or they automatically debunk it in their heads. And I think skepticism is healthy. And you mentioned you're more skeptic than anything. Where do you draw the line for you? What would discern between a legitimate experience versus something that maybe there was an alternate explanation for?
Well, I mean, that line is blurry, but for some things, there's an obvious explanation that people are choosing not to see for whatever reason, and for some, for some situations. So when I was doing research, there was one hospital, and I'm not going to name it, but it became pretty apparent that the claims surrounding it were exaggerated because it was somebody's actual form of income to market this hospital as being haunted, and then people came and they paid to go on tours through it. Then the motives become suspect, and then then you start digging deeper, and it's like, they used that exact same phrase in an interview in 2001 and in an interview in 2009, which then tells me that it's probably like practiced. And I'm totally rambling. And the answer to your question, I think, is just it's very individual. And you have to look at the motives of the people telling the story. And generally, I believe that people believe what they're telling me. Mm-hmm. But sometimes they don't. They're just telling you a story because it's a good story, or because they have ulterior motives. And I'm not sure that answers your question at all, but I'm going to stop talking.
No, it does. It does. I think it's hard to know where to draw the line. Like I said, I think there's some gray area between scientific evidence, and given under the outline that scientific method prescribes, versus just witnessing things that are unexplained. You can hear a noise and automatically know you're the only person in the room, and think, well, either that was paranormal, or you can get up and walk around and look for the cause of the noise. And I guess did you get a sense of people's perception of things being skewed when you interviewed them for the book, or did you maybe follow up with additional questions trying to debunk the experience?
The people that I spoke with, I did not get the impression at all that they were trying to deceive me, or that they were skewing any facts. And I did follow up with questions, but usually I didn't have to, because usually they had also, Ben and Rhonda in particular, they would tell me a story and they'd say, but we can't prove that because they saw, okay, spoilers, they were in a hospital and they saw a handprint on like glass. And I don't remember exactly, but I feel like it was like a condensation type of handprint. Mm-hmm. And Ben said, but we can't prove that it wasn't there before because we didn't like take a picture as we walked into the room, and we didn't. So he would debunk, like, or clarify the conditions, like, okay, so this happened and it was unusual, but it's possible that it was this thing. And say, but this thing happened and there is no possible explanation for it. It was just weird.
See, I appreciate that when you leave room for possibility, but, and admit when you can't find another possible explanation. I think those are the most compelling stories for me.
I agree.
Can you give us a sense of where these places were? I don't know if you can name them all, but just in general vicinity, country or state, or I know it was split up into several countries, but where were most of the stories that you wrote about?
Mark and I, we worked on basically each one of us wrote different chapters, and then we worked together on like putting the chapters together and editing them and all of that stuff. So I did a lot of United States, and he did a lot of Canada, and there's some international stuff in there as well.
Okay. If I don't know if you're going to work on a sequel or if you're coming up with any additional nonfiction stuff, but what's one ideal place that you'd like to research involving paranormal activity?
Oh man, what is it called? The suicide forest.
In Fuji? Is it at the base of Mount Fuji?
Is it? I'm gonna say yes as I'm Googling.
Yeah, they made a movie about it recently, and I believe I saw an episode of Destination Truth on that a few years back.
Oh, it's Japan.
Right.
Yeah, Fuji. Yeah, you're right. I can't believe I just blanked on that. But yeah, that place, I think that is like, yeah, that's pretty.
Would you ever travel there to document and write about it?
Oh, in a heartbeat. Yeah, I totally would.
See, I see you as the kind of adventurer type that's willing to go put yourself out there.
I would love to see the thing or experience the thing that makes me not a skeptic anymore. I'm not optimistic it would happen, but I would like for it to happen. So I'm open to experiences that have that possibility.
See, that's interesting because I find often when you meet someone who says I'm a skeptic, I often find it takes a lot to convince them. I took a friend of mine out with me on one of these investigations that we were doing locally here, and we didn't experience much that night. I don't know that I thought he was kind of bored, but I don't know what it would take to convince him. But what would it take to convince you 100% that at least there were some things that were unexplainable?
Well, I'm already convinced that there's things that are unexplainable, but I'm not sure that they come from like another plane or level of existence, or that there's an afterlife, that sort of thing. I don't know, just something that I couldn't possibly explain away.
So I'm thinking if you traveled to that forest and you saw some kind of manifestation, would you think trick of the eye, or would you want, photographic or video evidence to review?
I think it would depend on the circumstances, but photographic or video evidence would be ideal, especially if I took it, because then I would know it wasn't manipulated, and I'd be able to compare what I saw with my eye with what I saw with the camera.
I think you hit the nail on the head. There's a lot of these shows out there on TV that, that's what everyone says is, well, all this could be faked and it could be done for ratings. And there is like you mentioned earlier, a profit margin for these things. So it's incredibly difficult to convince anyone based off of what you see on TV. Yet it's something really entertaining. Do you watch any of those shows?
I I kind of hate watch them. I watched a bunch for research, not for this book, not necessarily as sources, because some of those hosts really jump on my last nerve. But because watching them gave me the opportunity to see the locations that I was writing about and get a sense of their space and how the light works and how the what everything looks like and get a sense of the atmosphere. Mm-hmm. I have to say, and I can't remember which show it was now, but it was one of those reality ghost hunter things, and I watched hours and hours and hours of it, of those types of shows. And there was one clip at the very end of one show that was 5 seconds long, and it was my favorite clip of all of the research I did for this book. And it was the thing, it was kind of like the seed of the thing that would, convince me to be a believer. And it was a shape going in front of a camera where there was no person and there was no way there could be a shadow cast by a person, because you could see. So at the camera was set at one end of the hallway, and at the other end of the hallway was a mirror, or it was a window, but it was dark, so it was reflective, and you could see the red light from the camera record button, and if anybody had walked behind the camera, you'd be able to see the reflection in the window. Mm-hmm. There was a shape that went between the window and the camera that didn't move like a person, couldn't have been a shadow cast from somebody on the other side of the camera, but blocked the light, the red blinky light on the reflection. So there was something physically there that didn't move like a person, that couldn't be explained in any way that I could tell. It was like a 5-second clip buried at the end of an episode, and I was like, but there's your story. Mm-hmm. Why are you spending 59 minutes running around telling me about goosebumps when you've got this cool thing, this actual potential evidence that you're just ignoring? And so that's why I don't like those shows, because they take what could be a really good story, but then when you blow everything up and fill it full of hyperbole, the good story gets lost, and I just think that you're lying to me.
Yeah, often at the end of those shows, they show the best evidence in some kind of a review or a wrap up, and sometimes it's almost better to just watch that small segment.
Right.
Well, I think involving the stories that you came across, there's I think TV tends to hype up the amount of what they call demonic activity or poltergeist activity. Did you find there to be such a high occurrence in that type of thing compared to just witnessing paranormal things, like visually or hearing something in the research you did?
The television shows definitely wanted to make things into demons far more than any of the eyewitness accounts, which, generally speaking, they would just say this is what happened, and they didn't try to explain it. And that's a huge generalization. Of course, there are some people who tried to explain it, but most of the people who were just everyday folk who had something happen to them that they didn't understand, they're just they just wanted to tell their story. They didn't want to explain it and explain, all about demonic possession and whatever. They're just no, this weird thing happened.
Well, can you give us a reminder of when the book's scheduled for release and how people can get a copy?
The book is coming out March 18th, and you can pre-order it now from Amazon and probably from any of the other usual suspects online. And when it comes out, you'll be able to get it from, Amazon and all the places online, and it'll probably be in some bookstores, but I'm not sure which ones.
Okay. Well, I'll keep people posted as I hear. Can you tell us about some of your other work and where we could find the most up-to-date information on your other projects as well?
Oh, I have, as you mentioned earlier, I have a lot of other work, but right now I'm open to submissions for the final installment of Magical Menagerie anthology series, and that one is Equus, so I'm looking for Pegasus and unicorns and horse stories, and you can find out all about that and all of my other stuff at my website, which is rhondaparrish.com. And I'm also on Twitter a fair amount, that's at Rhonda Parrish. And I'm on Facebook too, and I'm terrible at remembering to tell people to go there. And in part, that's because I can never remember what my username is there. Oh, there we go. Author Rhonda Parrish.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining me. And, I really do have a lot of fun talking about this stuff. This podcast is not by any means a way to make money. In fact, I lose money on it, but I do enjoy coming on and talking to people such as yourself who have an interest in this stuff. And, like in all of my other episodes, I will have all of these links that you talked about on my show notes at deviatus.com. Thank you. And I really hope that you have a successful book launch, and let me know if you come out with any other things up my alley.
I totally will, and thank you for having me.
All right. So thank you to Rhonda for making an appearance on Deviatus. I will have all of the links mentioned on this episode at deviatus.com/Parrish. That's Parrish. Guys, thanks again for joining us. Please feel free to rate in iTunes if you've been enjoying the content. That's what keeps me coming back for more and producing this show for free for you guys. Now, I've got a little special treat for you guys this week. In fact, I wanted to run an experiment. If you've been following the show, you may know that I've been getting a little more friendly with the folks at San Diego Paranormal Eye, and I've been going out on some investigations with them. And what I'm really interested in, having presented some evidence that I've personally collected on EVPs, is trying to determine if people hear the very same things that I'm hearing coming through the headphones. I often find on the television shows, as well as in real life when I present these to the group, we may or may not hear the same things all the time. So what I'd really like to do is play a small clip, just one of the few EVPs that I've recently caught, through my iPhone, actually, and I don't have any fancy recording equipment yet. I've actually ordered a Zoom recorder that I want to both use for the podcast and for paranormal investigation. But I caught a clip with my iPhone that I'd like to play for you guys and get your opinion on. Now, before I play the clip, I'm going to play it a few times. If you are listening to this in your car, or on your phone, basically anywhere without headphones, if you have a lot of noise in the background, I want you to pause it right here. Don't listen to it yet. I really want you to go and get a decent pair of headphones and listen, because the sound is very faint. And for you tech geeks out there like me, this podcast is compressed into an MP3 format, which means the file size is smaller and you're probably not getting the best version of audio. So I'm going to play it here to see if you can even hear anything. And then I'm also going to put in my show notes a link to the non-compressed WAV file. That should give you the best audio quality. So two things. I'll play it here a couple times and then visit deviatus.com/Parrish. And same thing with your headphones, a decent pair of headphones and the volume pretty high. I want you to listen to the clip again. It's only 11 seconds long total. I may clip it a couple times just so you can hear the EVP portion. But do this for me, and I'm gonna put this in my show notes. I'd like you to respond in the comments at my show notes. I have a couple questions for you. So number one, tell me yes or no, did you hear anything? Second question, do you believe it was a male or female voice? And finally, if you did hear something, let me know what you thought it said. If you can't make out what it said, put some notes as far as, how many syllables you might have heard or anything that comes to mind as you listen to this kind of free comment section. So here's the clip. I'm going to play it a few times. I'll loop it as well, the part where I hear the EVP portion. But again, headphones, really low noise in the background, and listen the best you can. And then go check out the uncompressed file version, which will have better quality at deviatus.com/Parrish. Start off by telling me your name right into this device. Start off by telling me your name right into this device. Well, there it is. I'm very anxious to know your thoughts. Let me know what you heard, if anything. And I will follow up maybe on a future episode with some of the responses I get, as long as I get a decent number of responses. So tell your friends about this. If you have anyone interested in paranormal research, I'm going to be doing some more experiments like this in the future. And I think research, with my background in healthcare and the instruction that I perform in a healthcare environment, this one's just for fun, but I think in the very near future, I want to start to do some true research which eliminates bias. So this is kind of just an experiment in preparation for that. So guys, thanks again for listening. Please feel free to go and comment on the website, actually, once you hear the uncompressed audio. And I will see you next time. Hope you guys have a great Halloween.